Hey everyone, it's PB here. Hope you're all doing well. This is the fifth video in the communication segment or playlist, I guess you'd call it. This particular one, we're going to go into technological factors. So things like texting and phone calls, face-to-face, like, and how communication can be different in these kind of areas. Um, like, a good example is the first one, which we'll go into, which will be a very good way to go, is texting or email or written communication. So when you're going into this kind of communication, you have no other means of being able to see how a person's body language is, or their environment, their sociological factors. People they may be around, you don't know if they're alone, if they're outdoors, and these kind of things can have impacts on how a person's mood is, how they communicate. A good example is someone who may use slang or swearing in as part of their vocabulary when they communicate may not do so if they're in a public environment. And so how they describe things or how they normally talk might be different compared to other things, even in texting, because sometimes you just automatically, if you're in a public environment, sometimes you might not even sort of think about it. I remember a good example. I was messaging someone and I put a bit of swearing in what I was messaging just to help emphasize what I was talking about. And this person asked me not to swear because they had their child looking over their shoulder, looking at what they were reading. And I wasn't expecting that. I mean, because I was expecting it was just between me and this person that we were talking to. So that kind of surprised me a bit. And so things like that, you've also got to be aware of, which I never, again, I admit that was the first for me. So that was something I didn't even think about until then. And so in particular, when it comes to written communication, it's certainly something to consider. When you're actually, or when you're actually talking, or sorry, texting, or sending an email, and you're putting in written communication, you'll find that grammar is quite important. So things like full stops, exclamation points, question marks, commas, and even just the correct spelling of things, that can be quite important. I remember there was when I taught this communications course for the SES, I put in a meme in there, which some of you probably have seen it. I get a bit of a giggle out of it and a bit of a laugh every time I see it because it cracks me up. But it's a writing. It says, "Let's eat grandma," and then below it it says, "Let's eat, comma, grandma," and then it says, "Punctuation saves lives," which again, it's very accurate, because how you say something written wise, it can be, if the way you put it, if you're not putting in proper things like exclamation points, question marks, sometimes that can make things difficult for another person to understand. And again, because you don't have the added benefits of being able to see body language or environment, social, facial expressions, all this kind of stuff, then it makes it harder to be able to see how the reaction, or how someone is taking something. A good example, if you say something, or if you send someone something and they're confused about it, you're not going to know unless they tell you. And the thing is, not everyone will do that. Not everyone will say, "Oh, I'm confused about that." Some people might just leave it alone and just pretend they didn't see it, or ignore it, or other people just move on to another topic. And then that can then come back to the person who sent it. Well, okay, you mustn't have found that funny, or you mustn't get what I said, or something, or did you not want to talk about it, And that's why whenever you're messaging or email, text, any of that kind of stuff, any written communication, grammar is certainly a very big very big key to put in because of this. Again, you think of full stops. How do you know if you're moving from one sentence to another and it's not part of the whole sentence? You know, or if you want to put a pause between a certain amount of words, you've got to know where to put the commas. And again, if you're asking a question, put a question mark, because sometimes you can say something, but it's a statement more than a question, and so you'd put an exclamation mark, more or less. And so sometimes that things like that are very important, because then that emphasizes how your written communication is going to come and how that's going to be. So yeah, that's something to really keep in mind and really try and think about, because how you see it and what you're putting down may not necessarily be how somebody else is going to see that. The same with when it comes to things like even shortening words or spelling. I know sometimes you can have, like, obviously there's a lot of the shortened words like LOL, which is laugh out loud. I've heard other ones that mean different things for lol, but I'll leave that one alone. You've got ROFL, rolling on floor laughing. And then rather than someone saying okay, they'll just say K, you know. And sometimes these kind of things can dictate a person's behaviour, how they're reacting to it. I know a word that in particular that I've seen a lot. I see it a lot. It's one of those words that 90% of people know the meaning, but whenever someone says I'm fine, you know they're definitely not fine. The thing is, though, I have seen some people who do say that, who are actually fine. But in 90% of cases, it's usually not the case. Usually they say they're fine, they're not. I know I use that in particular when I know, and I'm definitely not okay, but I want them to know that I'm not okay without actually saying that I'm not okay. Then sometimes saying I'm fine is usually the way to go. But it's not always the best way. Sometimes if you do want to talk to someone, you do want to say, hey, listen, I'm not doing okay, you're better off being upfront, straight out with it. You know, it does help that communication, but you've also got to be the other person's got to be understanding. You know, both people have got to be understanding. You know, you've got to know different parts and understand how the other person is. And I'm getting off topic here, which I do a fair bit, so I'll bring back to that. But shortening of words, yeah, very important to think about. And that, because again, how you think it or how you see it may not necessarily be how somebody else sees it. And I've seen this a lot as well. Have you ever said or typed in lol but not actually laughed out loud? I know I have. In fact, I do it a lot. But it is, for me, it is a bit of a way of saying, you know, that's pretty funny. I do like that. But I didn't literally laugh out loud. And so, yeah, that, again, something to think about, something to be aware of. As I mentioned before as well, you know, with written communication, you don't have the ability to be able to see a person's body language or their environment or people that they're around or their facial expression. Certainly a big part of body language. Excuse me. So, yeah, that's certainly a thing to keep in mind. So when it comes to this type of communication, I guess probably one of the biggest and most important things is probably grammar, because that really emphasizes certain aspects of what you're trying to say. So yeah, very important, that one. The next one, which I would say, which is phone calls or voice recording. Now this one can be this one's a little bit better than written communication, because I mean, you still got those inability to be able to read a person's body language and facial expressions and stuff. I mean, environment, you may be able to hear to a certain degree. Like, so if someone's outside, you might be able to hear the birds or something like that. So you might be able to hear that, you know, maybe they're at the park somewhere, or they could just have a pet bird, you know. sociological factors. So yeah, you might be able to hear people in the background. They could be at a cafe, or might be out in a shopping centre, or they could just be at home with people around them. So most of the time, sociological factors, you may be able to hear certain things to a degree, but not as much as you would face to face. Now, when it comes to this kind of thing as well, what specific words are used and how they come across. So things like swearing, slang, and even synonyms for different words, which I talked about in one of the other videos. Again, things like these certainly come into play quite a bit, and you've also got to add in that extra part of tone of voice as well, because that can also emphasize on what words you're saying, and how you want what you're saying to come across. I know swearing in particular is a very good thing in this particular instance, I should say, because swearing, I know in particular in Australia and with a lot of my mates and then stuff like that, although it's one of those things we don't use a lot and we don't swear a lot, when we do, it's usually not out of anger or spite or anything. It's usually to describe something or describe a certain situation. And your tone of voice can certainly help emphasize that. Obviously, if someone's angry and they're swearing, you can tell the difference by the tone of voice. It can usually be stern, straightforward, very direct type, a directive statement kind of voice. And so that's, again, tone of voice along with what specific words you use are very important. Slang, I say slang because, again, if you're working or talking with people from different cultures, sometimes slang words aren't as easily comprehended, I guess you could say. I remember one person who didn't really understand what the word sook. Didn't really understand what that word meant. So he was from different country and spoke English, but certain slang words he was a little bit unsure of. And this one in particular, he didn't know. He was up front. He asked us, and the parents and what asked, what it was and everything, and sort of told him what it was and that. And so slang, again, something to consider, be aware of. As I said before, synonyms for different words. I did experiment when I did. I guess you call it an experiment. When I taught this communications course for the ACS, I had one person walk out of the room and shut the door and go right at the back of the building. I had one person, and I said to them, I'm going to tell you one word, and I want you to tell me exactly what word, like what image pops in your head as soon as I say this word. And I wanted them to describe me every detail of the colours, the shape, all this kind of stuff. And I said the word flower. Now they described to me, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but a yellow flower or something like that, or some specific type of flower. I'm not a botanist, so I don't really know much about plants, but yeah, they said that. I'm like, all right, cool. And got them to draw it up on this whiteboard, and then I covered it with a bit of paper. Got the person I'd seen outside, got them to come in, and I said the exact same thing. And they had told me similar colours, but different shape, different flower. And then everyone who was in the room could see what the thing was. Now, this comes in play in particular because if you can see how one word comes across differently to different people, imagine if you've got a word that's something similar, like maybe a bush or a shrub. Now, I can tell you right now, not a lot of people are going to know the difference. There will be specific differences, but not a lot of people will know the difference. Some might say, oh, it looks like a bush. I'm like, oh, yeah, look at that shrub, And again, very important, because the meaning of one word to you and the image that comes into your mind when you think that word is going to be different to someone else. And so when you're speaking, written, any kind of communication, synonyms for different words, or just even the same word, excuse me, will definitely have different impacts on people, because you don't know what that word means to that person, what kind of symbol or image that they relate to that word. So that's very important to keep in mind, because how you see something, it will be different to somebody else. Now, a good example with this one is being in the SES. I can't remember if I explained it in other videos, but SES, State Emergency Services, is what it stands for. Whenever there's floods, natural disasters, anything like that, we'll go out, we'll help. We help people stop flooding going to people's houses, what we can with sandbags and whatnot. We put tarps in people's houses so if their roofs are leaking, stuff like that. So that's sort of what we do, is whenever there's natural disasters or things like that, storms, like that, we help out any way we can. So we're an emergency service. Now, I've said to people, again, when I was teaching this, that I showed an image of a large tree that had fallen onto this house, and or this large branch or something. And I said to them, would it be accurate describing, that this is a few small branches had fallen onto this tree? And they disagreed and whatnot. I said, that is very true. I said, but some people might see this. Now, here's a good example of relating to that. If you're in an urban area, and you've grown up in an urban area, you can sort of see much country, I guess you could say, too many big trees, or bigger trees, I should say. A big tree to you might be something that you've seen locally around you in an urban area. But to someone who's grown up in a country and they come to an urban area and say, no, that's quite a small tree. But to the person who's grown up in that area, to them, that's a big tree. And again, that's the differences of how they associate certain words to certain images. And when you're trying to describe that, especially if you're in an emergency situation, if you're talking over a radio, for example, and you're trying to describe that, the image to one person associated with that word could be different to the one who's communicating it. And that is certainly something you've got to keep in mind and consider. And phone calls, same thing, because, it's voice, so radio, phone call, voice recording. And again, this is why the importance of being aware of how you describe something is unique to you, and it could be slightly different or drastically different to whoever you're talking to or communicating to. It's not something that you can change per se, but it's just something to be aware of, and to know that how you describe something may be different to how somebody else receives that description. Again, not just describing, just with words in general. But something to think about and keep in mind. And as I said to you before, tone of voice, certainly something to think about. You've got stern, soft tone, open tone, high pitched, low tone, rough tone. Because obviously stern, usually generally if you're quite annoyed or angry at someone, or trying to really emphasize something very direct. A soft tone can usually be associated with someone who may be maybe a little anxious, or a little quiet, timid. Open tones, generally someone who's very honest, open, straightforward. High-pitched can be probably related to someone who may be excited. Low tone or deep tone, I guess, could be it's a bit of on an individual basis. That one's more of a I don't know what you would really call that one, but that one's probably could come that one could probably come almost across as soft tone in a way, in similar kind of context, that may be quiet, timid. Again, depending on the person. And rough tone. Rough tone, again, that's also a bit of an individual thing. That's where that can just be almost kind of who the person is, rather than more so the specific voice that they're using. And I think that's again where things like the way you say things and stuff like that certainly comes into play and can be quite important. So now, video calls. Video calls are very much similar to voice calls, pretty much all the same kind of things, except the only thing is you're being able to see more environmental context depending on the type of video. Like, so for example, for me, you're probably seeing from about just below my chest to just above my head. And yeah, so you can see certain things in my environment, you see my TV, my bed back there, curtains, air conditioner, all that kind of stuff. So you can see in certain environmental factors there, but again, I'm in my bedroom, so there's no other people here, and so but normally, again, if you're depending on how close you are with the video, then you may be able to see people in the background of that. If you're doing a video call, now again, most video calls that I've seen generally, if you've usually just got a person's face, you usually don't have too many things. I mean, I've done video calls with people where, although you can see just most of their face if they're in a shopping centre, occasionally you might see someone in the background or something like that. So generally, you can see a certain extent of environmental factors. Again, sociological factors, same thing. And you can also see probably one of the most important things is, excuse me, probably shouldn't have that soft drink before. Excuse me. One of the most important things you can see is body language and the person's facial expressions in particular. With what the video that I'm doing and the way I've got it, you can see that I always talk with my hands, especially if it's something I know a lot about and very passionate about. I'll talk with my hands, always, so I always have. But again, video call, sometimes talking with your hands isn't exactly an option. And yeah, so you'll get the added benefit of seeing a person's facial expressions, which can help you being able to communicate with them a bit better, because you've got more to rely on. You've got more to be able to think, okay, they look a bit upset, I might choose my words a little carefully, or, so forth and so on. Now, face-to-face. Face-to-face is something I will always be all for. I prefer face-to-face over any kind of means of communication, because you've got more to go on. You can see everything around you, so you can see the environment, sociological factors. You can see every part of a person's body language, whether they're tense or if they've got their fists, hands and fists, or open-handed. If they got a straight, if they're standing up straight, or if they're relaxed. All these different kinds of body language you can see, as well as the environment, sociological factors, facial expressions, pretty much all of that, all right there, and it makes communication a lot easier. However, again, you've got to be able to pick up on these kind of things and be aware of this kind of social interaction. I mean, part of the reason, so I'm 29 now, I think part of the reason social skills probably aren't as maybe good as they used to be is, I think, has a lot to do with technology. So a good example is, as I was talking before, when it comes to written communication, you have less to go on. Now, back before technology, a lot of people had to go and see each other face to face, which means they were building social skills. And so as by spending a lot of time with that, and you're constantly spending time with your friends or family, you're usually around a lot of people. Nowadays, you've got a lot more technology things. I mean, you've got gaming systems, you've got obviously things like email and text messaging and all that, which less social interaction to a degree. I mean, If you're gaming and you're gaming online and talking with friends and that, slightly social interaction, which again can build up your experience when it comes to communicating to a degree, but face to face, definitely always face to face. I've always been one for that, and for good reason. You pick up and you pick up different cues, different social cues that you're working with, and again, you've got a lot more to go on. And yeah, you build up your social skills a lot better when you're doing it face to face. So yeah, definitely always big on that. So when it comes to technological factors, definitely a very big thing to keep in mind, be aware of, different aspects and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that I would probably say that is another reason why social skills may not be as common or as good as they probably could be. Now, these are other factors that can contribute, being the operative word there. So a good example is being an only child. So obviously, if you're being the only child, then you have less social skills because you don't have brothers and sisters who you talk with, fight, all that kind of stuff. And even especially if you're not close with your parents, you don't talk to your parents so often as well. Same kind of thing. If you're growing up with a single parent as well, you don't have the mother figure or the father figure, and that kind of attribute there can have a bit of an issue there as well. Bullying, definitely a big one. I've certainly been through that, and I know that hurt my self-esteem and made me less confident, which means I wasn't communicating or socializing as much, which then can come into, which is the other one I've got here, which is depression and anxiety. Again, I've known someone who's been anxious about being social and being in groups and crowds and that kind of stuff. And again, this also comes onto even disabilities and disabilities and disorders. If you're someone who's got a disability or a certain disorder, and that sometimes that can make it harder for you to communicate with people, and that makes your social skills harder to, makes it harder to build relationships and that. But again, these kind of things can vary from individual to individual. Depends on a lot of different aspects and that. I mean, you can be an only child, but still be able to have a great group of friends who you communicate really well with. So, yeah, a lot of these things, again, things to think about, be aware of. But yeah, very, very important to think about all this kind of stuff. So, yeah. So I know this has been a bit of a long video, but I hope you've all got a fair bit of information out of it. The next video that I'll be doing, which will be mostly focused on self-awareness. So this one will probably be a bit of a shorter video, but yeah, certainly a very big thing to consider and be aware of. So as I said, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got a lot of stuff out of it, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Much love.